First and foremost, I want to thank the panelists on behalf of Sascha and myself for sharing their time and their insights on a very, very important topic that continues to evolve. Based on our prep call, we look forward to a very spirited discussion. And let's see. So I'm Evonne Sepsis with ESC Advisors, a boutique investment bank focusing on M&A and financing for life sciences companies. I'm going to hand it over to Sascha, and we'll kick off the panel.
Thank you, Evonne. Hello, everyone, and thanks to the panel as well here. I'm looking very much forward to an engaging discussion indeed. So my name is Sascha Berger. I'm a general partner at TVM. TVM is a long-time investor in the life sciences field, among those also a number of rare and orphan indications over the past couple of decades. Well, with that, I'm handing over to my esteemed panelists here. Maybe Edouard.
Thank you, Sascha. Edouard Caram from Global Partnership at Ipsen. Ipsen is a mid-sized company and really changed its scope and expanded recently with more than 20 asset acquisition in the last 3 years. And at Ipsen, I'm focusing more in rare disease and neuroscience assets. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Lubor Gaal. I'm the CFO and Head of Business Development at Circio. Circio is a Scandinavian startup biotech company focused on has a platform technology for gene and cell therapy. We are working in the field of circular RNA, but we're using a DNA vector, which allows us to get the same kind of efficiency or durability as gene therapy approaches. Our goal is to disrupt or solve the the big unneeds in gene therapy. And gene therapy, as you know, is rare disease. And we'll talk about more that in a minute. And we have an interesting program in alpha anti-1 antitrypsin.
Marie Leblanc from Lonza. Lonza is a CDMO organization, right? Contract manufacturing and development organization. We are active in the cell and gene space, among other modalities. And I'm very much looking forward to discuss through the panel today about the challenges to meet the rare disease needs, which are very specific from a manufacturing perspective. Thank you for the invitation.
Hello, my name is Simon Chandler. I'm the CEO of Rinri Therapeutics. We are an emerging biotechnology company from the UK developing regenerative cell therapies for hearing loss, which is not traditionally seen as a rare condition, but there are many small conditions within hearing loss which our technology should be able to treat. Thank you very much for the invite for this panel, and I very much enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you, and I'm Stefano Portolano. I'm the CEO of Azafaros. We are a clinical stage company. Our lead asset, nidzobaglostat, has a unique dual mode of action and an excellent penetration of the blood-brain barrier. Hence, our focus on lysosomal storage disorders with neurological involvement. We are now running a phase 2 study. We should have data from it later this year, and we plan to start 2 phase 3 studies next year in gangliosidosis and Niemann-Pick type C disease. These are rare and ultra-rare diseases with limited or no options for treatment. In full transparency, my goal today is for those in the room who are convinced that rare diseases are a valuable investment from a financial and societal perspective to reinforce that conviction. If there's anyone in the room with any doubts, I hope that you go back after this 1 hour convinced that actually you should call your nearest rare disease company and make an investment. Thank you.
Talk for a minute on the landscape of orphan diseases. And maybe, Stefano, you can continue and just touch upon the regulatory landscape.
Yep.
And of course, anyone from the panel jump in. But Stefano, maybe you can start with how that is evolving and what changes you've seen and what we see for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so I would say maybe we should start 30 years ago, but I promise I'll only take 3 minutes, with the approval of Cerezyme, which is perhaps the trailblazer and the first ultra-rare disease drug that was approved in the early 90s. And this was based on a very small study, open label, in Gaucher disease patients. This is an enzyme replacement therapy, and where they observed a reduction in hepatosplenomegaly, a key sign of this disease. Now, fast forward 30 years later, what happened in parallel, on one hand, there's more and more incentives to develop orphan drugs and drugs for rare diseases. Of course, the FDA, the European Union first enacted the orphan drug legislation, but many countries today have orphan drug status, including Switzerland, where we are, the UK, and even in Latin America, more recently, there have been enacted incentives for orphan drugs. So, and at the same time, also payers, not only regulatory authorities, are treating orphan drugs and drugs for rare disease in a different way. For example, the AMNOG in Germany looks at orphan drugs in a different way versus drugs for larger indications, giving them some incentives during the reimbursement process. The Italian reimbursement agency, when they establish innovation of a product, orphan drugs have a different treatment. So there's clearly a political will that has been increasing, and both in terms in each individual country and geographically. At the same time, though, because Cerezyme was the first one, and both regulatory authorities and reimbursement authorities thought, well, this is a one-off and it's not going to have a big impact on my budget. Now there's actually, I would say, more scrutiny and at the point of rigidity sometimes. So today, regulatory authorities do look for valid clinical data, or if biomarker data needs to be validated. And similarly, reimbursement authorities are looking for clinical outcomes and are looking for really solid data sets. So to give you an example, I described a very small study that Cerezyme got approved with. But more recently, if you look at drugs like enzyme replacement therapies, therapy for alpha monoacidosis, very rare disease, very severe, this was actually a placebo-controlled trial. Still a small trial with 25 patients, but it was placebo-controlled. You can agree with agencies on regulatory flexibility, as they say. Another example I can cite is the Mepsevii approval by Ultragenyx. This was, for example, based on a multi-domain clinical endpoint, which was developed specifically for that disease. It is a very small study, and both these drugs are, by the way, now reimbursed by authorities. So you can still do it. You need solid clinical data sets or biomarker data that are validated. And just to close where I started with Cerezyme, just if you don't know it, I'll tell you. So Cerezyme today, it's a 30-year-old product. It now operates in a competitive market. There are several enzyme replacement therapies for Gaucher disease. There are more than one oral therapy available for these patients. And Cerezyme still brings in for Sanofi $700 million a year for the last 6 or 7 years. So it was a good investment after all in that particular case.
Lubor.
I feel like that rare disease is starting a new area. So, I mean, from a regular point of view, I mean, you see more and more news now from the FDA that they are going to push for more therapies in rare disease, and they open the door. I feel like almost like in oncology, the door for accelerated approval closed, and it just opened up for rare diseases. There's now more and more news in there from Peter Marks, the person that heads the FDA for rare diseases, saying, even I just saw it, I think yesterday I saw it in the news, accelerated approval will be the standard for rare diseases. So until, of course, maybe there'll be so many therapies that door closes, but that probably will take some time. So I think right now what has happened, at least from the FDA point of view, is saying, have said to the whole industry, but also the investors, don't spend more money in oncology. You don't get a quick approval here anymore. Go into rare diseases. There's the new area of opportunities.
Can I just expand on that, Lubor? And this is for the whole panel and for you, Sascha, as well as an investor. We just had the obesity panel before this, and we've seen the focus on cardiometabolic, hypotension, obesity versus rare disease. And where do people fall in a partnership perspective on that, as well as an investment when you think about rare disease vis-a-vis oncology and some of these very, very large patient populations?
Okay, maybe just kicking this off, but handing it over to the panelists immediately thereafter. I mean, after all, there's the question of the business case, and that means competition, right? How much is out there? What is competing? And that has been the challenge in oncology, even though markets are massive. Also, if, I mean, tens and hundreds of assets are in clinical trials, where do you really have the grip? And that probably is different in rare and orphan indications. But that also has to be made clear to the investors, how the money is best invested, and how to get to that approval in the end. So maybe playing it back here to the panelists, what would you recommend a company out there? Lubor, if you're raising funds, right? You're speaking with investors frequently. How do you address immediately concerns that you're just after a niche indication, it's risky, and in the end you don't know about the real market, given pricing uncertainty. So what's your pitch, so to say?
Yeah, twofold. The pitch is following. I mean, I think the problem that we're having right now is that at least we're focusing on gene and cell therapy, and there's a perception in gene therapy that there's a clear first mover advantage. So the first gene therapy going out there basically will own the market, and there's no money may be made for second or third. So that of course would if you're number 4 or 5, probably then you're dead. You know, basically, I think at least that's the perception of today. So what is our pitch? Our pitch is actually that we address the two unmet medical needs, or no, the two major problems of gene therapy. What is this? Cost of goods and safety. And why is that problem? Is because the gene expression is so inefficient that you have to give such a high viral load, and that high viral load comes with safety disadvantages or issues, and also, of course, produces a high cost of goods. We have a new protein expression platform that is super productive. It's much higher expression level for much longer duration at linear RNA, and thereby you can reduce the viral load. That should then also reduce the cost of goods at least tenfold, and it also addresses the safety issues. So what we are trying to say is we probably have a technology to bring gene therapy for much larger patient population, and you go into diseases where you are not limited in terms of patient population, and then you have a much larger pricing potential. And because our cost of goods is so much lower, you know, I don't think pricing is such an issue.
And maybe Lubor, Stefano, you can also comment on the fact that the FDA is looking at rare and orphan indications, obviously, trying to potentially help further development. But what would be your recommendation for other companies also going out there raising funds? Is it a shortcut to an approval? Should they plan and raise large amounts of money, because in the end it still needs to be a placebo-controlled study? So what would be your recommendation here?
Yeah, I have to say our own experience with the agencies, like I said, and as you can see for other products as well, there are very few cases where you can run, let's say, a small open label study, right? So if you have a very hard endpoint, let's say mortality, and you can actually show that you improve mortality, and then you can use natural history data. But otherwise, the agencies have been quite resistant to do that, and they basically require placebo-controlled or head-to-head if there's something in the market already. So I think our approach, and what I would suggest others to follow, and when approaching investors, is to have a clinical plan that actually is solid, and it's rooted in today's world and not in 30 years ago world. And that may well mean placebo-controlled studies, or may mean studies on top of existing therapies, right? If there's something in that particular disease. Having said that, and it's been said on the panel already, there is clearly attention from the FDA and the EMA, although the EMA maybe doesn't talk as much about it, in terms of like really helping to find new solutions in these diseases. So the sentence I've heard from FDA is we're going to use regulatory flexibility and look at the totality of data. Peter Mark at CBER has been very vocal. The Commissioner Caleb has been very vocal as well. So there's clearly a will, and maybe we as an industry and investors can help by putting the money into investing into, for example, biomarkers, which could be the next place where we actually go with accelerated approval, as Lubor was saying. So I think there are no shortcuts, to be honest, and I think you need to be rooted in what the agencies actually believe, because otherwise you're taking too big a risk.
Thank you. And Edouard, we've talked a little bit about investing. You've been very active on the M&A and partnership side. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process, what you like to see, what you've done, and what you plan on doing?
It's a very broad question.
Yep.
So just one comment on what has just been said, and particularly on the funding chain of innovation and transformative therapies. Obviously, since the last 2 to 3 years, there was a little challenge for new companies to bring innovation to the next stage, particularly new companies. And we have also seen some companies raising much more fund for their follow-up rounds. So that's something we need to adapt the pharma company in terms of having to play with potentially less player, but who have raised more money and are able to show some major inflection points in terms of where they are. So what's typically we are looking at, so Ipsen is a mid-sized companies. I don't want to be provocative, but today we are not actively investing in gene therapy for a few reasons, but that's obviously an area we are watching very closely. There are some reasons. We talk about regulatory setback, but I'm not really concerned on that because last year was a fantastic year for gene therapy with the approval of 6, I think, drugs, and it will be potentially 17 this year. There are some major manufacturing issues we see at the pharma companies, and I'm very glad that we have Lonza here in this panel because it's really a topic that is critical for us in order to do partnership, and the business model and the we are looking at for gene therapy. I think there is a very clear path for making a sustainable model for indication where, for instance, the treatment cost is very high. So I'm thinking about hemophilia A, where it's patients will have to spend 20 million in a lifespan of treatment. So if you come with a gene therapy with one curative treatment, you will obviously find a model there. So typically, at the pharma industry, we try to find the best way to bring innovation, transformative treatment. So it means that we have to focus where we are strong, where we can create values. So we try to find synergies with our treatment, our franchise. So it's very it's different from one company to another, and we try to be extremely efficient and lead the assets in the market. So in terms of process, it's very challenging. We are talking about orphan drugs, so we are reinventing the wheel each time we assess a new asset. We have to work with different experts. We have to figure out what will be the new clinical development plan for a specific indication. And it's very exciting and challenging at the same time because of that. Everything is new, and we have to find a way to profitability and to find a way to there. And the main challenge we have is maybe in this landscape of rare disease is we are still looking for a business model for ultra-rare disease, ultra-rare indications, which are 85% of rare indications, and I think it's still to be fun.
I think we touched upon two topics which we'll expand on in the next 30 minutes or so. One was manufacturing, and on that obviously is a challenge, so we'll discuss that. And the other one we touched upon was pricing. So maybe let's start with that one. For even ultra rare, even more so, but overall in general in this field, pricing of therapies has been an issue and will be an issue. So what's the panel's take on the pricing challenge? Can that be maintained, the high prices? Has there been erosion? Do you feel that the price can support going into ultra rare indications? I don't know if someone wants to kick in here or otherwise.
Yep, I can kick in here.
Simon.
I think that I'm kind of representing the regenerative cell therapy approach rather than kind of gene therapies, which I think is a bit of a focus to date. I think in regenerative cell therapies, there is a big problem with manufacturing and scaling, particularly for rare and orphan diseases. The only way that you're going to be able to control your cost of manufacture, cost of goods, is by scaling up your therapy, and there's no demand for that in some of these indications. So I think that the price points that regenerative cell therapy would come in at would be prohibitive for a lot of healthcare systems. And I believe that the only way really through this problem is to kind of develop more broadly applicable cell therapies that can be applied to multiple rare diseases. And I think there are some regenerative cell therapy companies out there which are showing the way forward on that. There's the kind of Neurona Therapeutics over in the US that are developing neural-based stem cell-derived therapies for focal point epilepsy, which epilepsy is not a rare disease in itself, but the location of the epileptic kind of episodes are rare and focused, but their approach is more of a platform approach, much more of a broader approach. And I think by having that broad approach, they can then scale up that therapy to treat more of these rare conditions, and therefore drive the price down and get it more acceptable and get that access and that democratization that's really needed. Otherwise, I think if we start developing hundreds of cell therapies at millions of pounds per dose, it's just not going to be sustainable, and people aren't going to get access to them. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm a bit more optimistic maybe than you are. Indeed, that's one way certainly to improve the cost of goods, right, of manufacturing. Another way is certainly looking at automation. Today, manufacturing processes are still very manual and creates indeed a high cost of goods, right? Especially when we come to talk about gene therapies and those personalized therapies. So looking in how we can improve, right, through innovation and automation, the manufacturing processes, but also the QC will be really critical for the future of the industry. The analytical, basically, analysis today are sometimes longer than the manufacturing process, which is creating not only a patient challenge from a treatment perspective, but also indeed a manufacturing challenge, because we have the product ready, but not still releasable. So it requires indeed to take some interim steps to treat the patient and ensure they are treated while they are still into a condition where they can receive the treatment. So automation is certainly the future, and also treatment at point of care in the future will be also important to overcome some of the logistical challenge of the gene and cell therapy. When we have to basically collect the cells, and we have to deal with fresh material, we have very short lead times to manufacture and re-engineer the cells and get them back to the patients. So developing cryopreserved and frozen, basically, starting materials is enabling the future of the industry to overcome those challenges.
Well, I'm even more optimistic. I think there's no problem whatsoever for the pricing in rare diseases, because AI will solve all our problems. And by the way, now that the insurance companies will save all the money on obesity and all the related diseases, they have all the money to spend on rare diseases. With all joking aside, I think maybe our imagination is too limited. I think maybe we can consider ourselves in the same situation. I mean, I think cost of goods are absolutely critical, of course. If cost of goods drives your pricing, of course, we have an issue. So I mean, that's why, of course, our technology may be very important, where we can drive cost of goods down tremendously, and so that you don't have that limitation. But I still think that our imagination is limited, and you can maybe consider the problem or the pricing that we have right now, similar to what happened when antibodies first came on the stage. Like the whole world was dominated by small molecules. They were cheap as hell, like to produce, and antibodies were super expensive. And how would we ever pay for them? And then what? Humira became the best-selling drug in the world. Maybe cell therapy will become the best-selling therapy in the world. I don't know.
If I may add, sorry, Evonne, on the pricing, I think I agree with what's been said. It's been important. There are really two questions in one. One is in general pricing for rare diseases. And Lubor, you joked, but I think there is not a new problem or challenge with pricing. Like I said, the changes happened a long time ago after the very first rare disease therapies. But if you look at recent launches and recent approval, if you look at all the benchmarks with rare diseases, both in the US and in Europe, they're still commanding very fair prices. If you look at the latest launch from Sanofi Nexviazyme, you're looking at more than $500,000 a year per patient for a chronic treatment. So this is not a one-off like a gene therapy. So it is still possible. Like I said earlier, you need good data set, and it's not easy, but it's possible. And then the problem with the cell and gene therapy is the cost of goods, because if you have no flexibility in your discussions, then of course that's a very, very tough discussion.
Yeah, I think, everyone has understood as well that manufacturing is indeed a component, an important component of the cost of goods. And maybe one of the other way to look at it as well is the variability in manufacturing, right? There is basically, which is accounted for in the cost of goods. If you are not able basically to each time treat the patient and get the reimbursement, this is also factored into the pricing. So the better we're going to go about manufacturing and ensuring the quality and less variability, the improved cost of goods will be there then. But it requires indeed, closing the process. Today we are still dealing as an industry a lot with open and manual processes. Automation is important, but also, having platforms, as you said, right, that will enable better cost of goods in the future for manufacturing. So there is a lot of innovation which needs to come into the industry, into the manufacturing, to support better access for the patients to the treatments in the future. And the other point maybe I wanted to bring as well when you were talking about the manufacturing challenges, specifically I think for the rare and ultra-rare diseases, how do you deal with the spike of demand? Because when you're going to get the drug approved, you're going to have a lot of patients to treat who are willing to access the treatment more or less at the same time. And that's, I think, sometimes the benefit. We have seen a lot of our customers going, for instance, with their own manufacturing, coming with an external partner, a CDMO. In the end, will give you this ability to ramp up and ramp down, because there will be a stage where you're going to have less patients to treat. The reoccurrence of the disease will be much less. And that's an advantage you can also have in working with third parties, CDMO organization.
Okay, thank you, Marie, for that highlight. Maybe we should continue our discussion on going also on the details of gene therapies and other innovative modalities, as the panel says. And we discussed gene therapies, challenges. We also had an investor panel earlier today where I think the thumbs up and thumbs down were kind of mixed on gene therapy. So there are always people who like it and others who see the challenges. In the specific case of rare and ultra rare indications, is that something where you, Lubor, see people being receptive out there and financing that? What's your current take on investor sentiment and people supporting that journey?
Very good question. I actually was a little bit surprised about the negative view on gene therapy on the investor panel. I thought it would be all thumbs up, but it wasn't the case. But then when they were asked, I think people absolutely buy into the concept of gene therapy, and I think all the investors want it to become a reality. Unfortunately, I don't think people know the road there. I mean, I think the reality is already here. We have now 8 approved gene therapy programs. Most of them are AAV-based therapies. I think they're doing well, considering where they are. I mean, Novartis published data from the SMA study, I think last year, that now they have 7.5-year expression data. So this is a very doable approach. So I think we're seeing really good signs that people give confidence that that this can actually work for the long term and not be just a short-term solution. Because of course the problem with all the viral-based therapies is that you can only give one shot, and then you can't redose these patients. And there's a concern that maybe it's not a forever solution. So it's not that gene therapy doesn't work forever. It only works for a certain period of time. So and what's after that? And so I think there's a lot of concern, but I think we should also look at what's happening out there. And for our technology, I mean, our technology is super exciting, but also super early. So we get a lot of open doors, but of course, people ask us for a lot of data. And being a small company, young company, we don't have all the answers for all the questions. So right now, I see a little more hesitation from an investment point of view, but I think that's a reflection for all biotech companies. I don't think that maybe, except for obesity, maybe there's not an area where there's a lot of excitement from investors to invest in right now. So I'm confident. I think we have a very interesting solution. We just need a little more time to produce more data and to show that it works. We have already shown some really interesting animal data, and we've been told that, if we can show a bit more of that, then there will be a lot of interest in our technology to fund us going forward. So I'm very confident that there will be more thumbs up in the future than actually thumbs down for gene therapy.
Can I just add, I think that the situation for the investibility of orphan and rare diseases and the larger conditions in terms of what the small biotech needs to do are quite similar. I think that my impression, my understanding is, the investors have skepticism about the reality of commercial traction and being able to get into the market. And I think it is incumbent on even the earlier stage biotech to think about how they're going to get to market and what is needed to get there. To Marie's point about spike of demand, you should be anticipating that and working out how you're going to be able to deliver that. It's not rocket science to know that's going to happen. So think about how you're going to do that, and kind of almost start with the end in mind. I know it's a cliche, but you can actually do a lot of the groundwork at the very early stages and effectively de-risk your path to patients. And I think that would help overcome the caution that investors have over modalities like gene therapy or cell therapy or particular rare indications.
Thank you. To expand on this topic, we're coming out. We hope there's some nice optimism going into this year. Last year was a tough financing environment. So, Edouard, starting with you, when companies come to you, and let's just talk orphan and rare, right? Not gene therapy, but at what point should they come to you? How much data would you like to see? And when would you like to engage with companies, given the current environment of cash conservation and what they can and cannot do from a data perspective?
Excellent question. Very difficult to give a very simple answer. Well, we are looking assets from drug candidates to marketed stage, so it's quite broad. I think that each of the stage has a specific inflection point, so we need to understand what's value already built on each program and what we can bring before being able to engage. Typically, our natural area of investment where we think we can really bring a lot of value is phase 1, phase 2, because we can generate some, of course, clinical data, and some of the clinical data are on patients on phase 1, so we may be in situations to are more confident on this, but it's just an indication. We are really exploring the full landscape from drug candidates and eventually work with platforms to work on targets. So it's really, there is no specific rules. It really depends on the indication. If we are looking for a very broad scope, obviously we'll prefer to have a more later stage asset. But if we are looking for transformative breakthrough treatment, we are ready to assess a very early stage asset, and that's what we do.
Yeah, I wanted to add on the investibility and the interest from pharma, and I'm glad that we have Ipsen at this table. I think what happened as well is that there had been, again, an evolution. There was a moment where rare diseases were so fashionable that everyone wanted to have it, and you had Pfizer and GSK, everyone had a rare disease unit. And then what happened, I believe, they realized that the business model from a Pfizer or GSK really does not fit rare disease. And so then they divested their program. Roche divested the Angelman syndrome program, which was apparently a good one. So, and that has generated some pessimism in investors, because they're saying, well, big pharma is walking away from rare diseases. And again, it's a bit of a perception, because first of all, there are some large companies that are still very much invested into rare diseases. Think of AstraZeneca with the Alexion and then the gene therapy acquisition. Sanofi is still very active with recent launches. There are smaller companies that are actually committed now to rare diseases, and Case is a good example with the Amrit acquisition, and clearly they are interested in establishing themselves as a rare disease company. So, and Ipsen, of course, it's at this table, and others. So it's just an adjustment, and I think what happened, they realized this was really a fad, and the Pfizers and the GSKs of the world. But there's still quite a few companies who are interested, and quite a few companies who have to actually acquire because they don't have such a big pipeline.
I think the challenge is, of course, that rare disease is a super heterogeneous field. I mean, it just covers everything. All the indications, all therapies, all different organs. So as a business unit in a pharma, it's impossible. So, I talked to one pharma company that said, well, no, we don't do rare diseases, but we do gene therapy. It's different how you define it or so. And I think, like Edouard was saying, every time they look at an opportunity, it's a different story, it's a new story, different experts. It's not like you can build on other things. So I think having rare disease as a business model is incredibly complex, and probably you have to just carve out a certain niche in the rare disease space where you can focus on.
I think there have been opportunities in the past to consolidate different rare disease plays, also on the public side. So some of the also companies from us, the TVM portfolio, went public with such a strategy. Unfortunately, of course, given the current state of biotech public markets, that did not always play out very well. But maybe also here's the light at the end of the tunnel. We're all more hopeful that public markets will become an option again, also for biotech, and then besides pharma, that would open up another route of financing and possibility to grow and potentially commercialize those rare and ultra rare opportunities by specialized players. But that's a bit outlook and hard to tell where we are today. Maybe we can have one case study with Simon, because you were also telling us earlier that initially you were trying to commercialize or better go into rare and orphan, and then in the end you decided against that. But maybe that's interesting to understand why in the end you did that.
Yes. So yeah, in our product development, we're developing a regenerative cell therapy for neural hearing loss, and within that umbrella, there are a number of rare conditions, genetic conditions or acquired conditions, and on the face of it, some of those conditions represented a unique opportunity to have a kind of homogeneous patient population with certain kind of phenotypes and certain issues. So we discovered an orphan condition called OPA1, which is a peripheral neuropathy in which patients go kind of blind and deaf at a relatively early age, and these patients have no solutions whatsoever, so they're kind of locked in almost from their teenage years. So for us, that it represented a really massive medical need for these particular patients. Not a huge patient population, but and we felt they were going to be homogenous because it was a genetic diagnosis. But actually, when we came to explore these patient populations and really look in detail at them, the heterogeneity was huge, and actually there was a big gradient between different patients in terms of their auditory neuropathies, particularly, as well as their sight neuropathies, and that really reduced the value of kind of working with these patients, because the data we were likely to get from this patient population was also going to be very noisy, very heterogeneous, and wouldn't have the power we needed to show that our therapy was working. So unfortunately, despite this population being identified actually in clinics in the UK, we kind of moved away back to the larger opportunities in hearing loss, into age-related hearing loss, because even though there's heterogeneity there, they were much more defined in terms of their diagnosis and relatively easy to recruit. But I think it's not, for hearing loss, rare conditions are very current, because there's been some very good data in the last few weeks from some of the US companies working in gene therapies in otoferlin, which is a rare kind of presynaptic hearing loss monogenic condition, and I think they are definitely paving the way for the bigger solutions out there, like Rinri is developing for, and understanding the challenges of bringing these therapeutics to market in terms of pricing, manufacture, market access, things like the cold chain and these kind of things. So I think these are really advancing the field a lot further, and hopefully therapies like Rinri's will come in and actually be able to broadly treat a lot of different rare therapies as almost like a platform technology in the end. But unfortunately for us, it didn't really work out in terms of focusing on that particular rare indication.
No, I think that's a super interesting story. One thing that came out in recent press releases from the FDA, not surprisingly, is that they said you should be talking to them earlier about the endpoints that you want to measure, so and especially for lethal or deadly rare diseases. I mean, there's a lot of people working for it. There's a lot of flexibility. I think the FDA said maybe you can identify some endpoints for the subpopulation where this would work for them or so. Having said that, one of the reasons we went into AATD was that actually the patient population is quite large. There's about 200,000 patients that have the disease, and you don't actually need a clinical endpoint to get approved. I mean, what is known is that you need that alpha-1 antitrypsin protein at a certain level to show in the plasma. If you reach that level, you can get approved. So that, of course, reduces a lot of burden in terms of having to show clinical benefit. But the FDA has already agreed that they know that if you can reach that level, that the most severe form of the disease is prevented. So I think that's the discussion you need to have. I think it's critical to your point, understanding your patient population. You can make, of course, genetic testing, finding out, their journey. But I think it's also important, of course, to talk to the regulatory agency and say, what is a doable endpoint for these patient populations? Do we really have to show clinical benefit, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, or can we just, look at biomarkers or look at surrogate markers? And I think, clearly for benign diseases, there would be less flexibility, but I get the impression from the FDA for, deadly diseases or very dangerous diseases, there's a high degree of flexibility at the regulatory agencies.
And if I may add something which may be obvious, and you alluded to that, Lubor, but obviously going early to the agencies and discussing with them your endpoints and clinical study design, but involving also patient organizations in that interactions, it's key. Everybody says it, but if you do it, actually you see the results. You can actually look in the news now. The recent documents become available from the FDA discussion on the Sarepta approval that actually Peter Marks has been mentioned a few times today, specifically asked the clinical team, clinical reviewers at FDA who were negative on the approval to look at some of the patient testimonials that were included in the package. So there's clear openness there, and I've been in meetings with the FDA and the EMA where patient organizations representatives were present. As you can imagine, that changes the dynamic very, very meaningfully. So that's an early investment of time and really understanding what patients need, but it does pay off on the long term.
Maria, I'd like to circle back to manufacturing for a moment and think about or ask you what suggestions or advice you'd have when there's a company thinking about manufacturing, specifically working with you, and obviously cash conservation is key. How do you go about working with an emerging growth or mid-cap biotech company in the space?
Well, we really start by understanding indeed what's their needs and their strategy, right? I mean, from a clinical trial setup, as you said, I mean, that's very important, right? From the beginning, how can we best support, right, to meet their timeline, and what's the flexibility they also require, either from a location perspective or also from, number of patients they want to treat. Because this is really also critical, right? And have they thought around, indeed, what I was mentioning before, how are they going to collect the material? Are they starting from a fresh starting material or frozen? Because that also, derives then how do we set up the logistics and the manufacturing challenges. Another important point is how, it requires really strong collaboration with the clinical centers, right? When it comes to patient recruitment and patient treatment, the scheduling of the patients for basically engineering the cells is also very, very important, because we need to mobilize a lot of operators, for instance, to engineer the cells, also to release those cells from a quality control perspective, but quality assurance. So that requires a really close partnerships and discussion that we are setting up, through different governance structure, but also really understanding at the beginning, establishing the dialogue on what is needed and how can we support, right? But the patient indeed is very much at the heart of what we are doing, not only from a treatment perspective, but the experience they are having, because the fact that they have to go through this leukapheresis is also very challenging for them, right? And they put a lot of hope as well into those treatments. So it needs to be taken into account for us as a manufacturer, on how we handle the patient material. We develop a lot of empathy training. It sounds obvious to say, but even for our people on the shop floor, to understand, that they have basically a treatment saving life into their hands. And yeah, that's really critical. And we have a lot of positive feedbacks, from patients that have been treated or from their families. They sometimes come to the sites to basically share back their experience. And this is heartbreaking. This is usually heartbreaking because it has changed their life, not only for for them, but also for their entire families and surroundings, who usually have to adapt as well their daily life, to support their niece, nephew, son, daughter, and when it's come to children, it's also very very challenging. Yeah.
Well, looking at the time, I think we can open it up for a few questions if there are. So I encourage the audience, if you have questions.
We only have a minute, so if you would like a question, raise your hands now.
No question. Okay, that means that we covered it all, right, without the need for further questions. So we could close this panel with provocative, negative, whatever views, but maybe let's leave the audience with a positive vibe on rare and orphan indications. So maybe I can give it a start, and then whoever feels wants to join in. So we did invest in a number of them. Most unfortunately did not work out, but that is actually the business of venture capital. And some did, and actually we had some of our best investments in that space. So I'm pretty sure that this will continue if there's great innovation, and I'm hopeful with the panelists here that we're addressing the key concerns on pricing, manufacturing, and the likes. But please, some call to action.
Call to action is to continue to work on this, not because it's easier or because you can cut corners, but it is a valuable investment, like I said, financially has been demonstrated, but also because you actually have the opportunity to help families facing sometimes dramatic situations with these diseases.
I'll just say, I think, I'm not going to say anything provocative. I think just to kind of agree with Stefano and say it's obviously an area we need to continue to work on, but I think we need to focus on scale up of manufacturing and automation, as Marie says, to really see the benefits of regenerative cell therapy for rare and orphan conditions. Otherwise, my slightly negative point is it won't ever happen because of the cost of goods issue. But I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of new technologies that are coming on board. So we need to kind of adopt them and see which works to break through this bottleneck.
I would just say follow the FDA. Right now, so rare disease, a new place to be. They open the door to the biggest market in the world. So I don't worry at all. I think it's going to be more difficult to pick the right opportunity, to show that it really works. And then I think, as I said, maybe the best-selling drug in the world will be a gene or cell therapy 10 or 20 years from now.
No, I would very much concur to what Lubor has said at the beginning, right? I mean, basically 20 years ago, when we were looking at monoclonal antibodies, there were a lot of questions. And this is what makes me optimistic, for the future of gene therapies and the cost of goods. It doesn't mean it's going to be an easy path, but there are lots of players working on this. And obviously, I mean, we also need to understand, for us as a manufacturing organization, what are the challenges and where the innovation is going from you, so that we can work together on this.
And maybe just one provocative comment on one area of investigation or improvement. The first one is that we are looking a great comeback from small molecule in the area of orphan drug disease with the help of AI, and there are there is some potential to play in the epigenomic pathway. So I think that's something we are also looking at the company in terms of alternatives. The small molecule is still there. And there is, for me, a personal area of investigation or improvement is to find the business model and in ultra-rare indications. So we have the history of investing in ultra-rare, but I still believe that it's really an area to change the way we think. It's 85% of rare indications, so that's obviously the next continent to explore from my perspective.
Well, thank you everybody on the panel and the audience for discussing an area that is so important to patients, and it's changing and it's evolving, and given everyone this panel, I'm sure it's going to succeed moving forward. So thank you for your time.